Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you and the ranking member and for holding the committee today. And of course, Mr. Secretary, thank you for testifying. Thanks for giving us 3.5 hours. Before I start, I'd like to remind all the members of the committee about Journal Club, the first meeting of the bipartisan Journal Club on Foreign Affairs, led by myself and my colleague across the aisle, Dean Phillips, will be on the 16th at 5:15 p.m. Of course, the goal is to go beyond, sort of the 5 minutes that we get to have in committee and dig deep into a dialogue across the aisle about key issues. And we'll just take 2 journal articles that are published, and you'll get those. In fact, all the details will be to your schedulers by COB tomorrow. And if you could, and if you're coming, let us know, and then read the articles before you get there. Now for my comments. As Congress considers the State Department's appropriations, we have to prioritize a lot of things, but I'd like to mention 3 that are really important to my constituents: countering Communist China, reinforcing our ally Israel, and of course strengthening alliances in the Western Hemisphere. First, countering the Chinese Communist Party. The CCP is the greatest threat facing the world, I believe, and I'll use sort of a DIME paradigm, what I call the DIME paradigm, to describe that: diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. Diplomatically, China has deployed the Belt and Road Initiative to drive a wedge between the United States and developing nations and our allies. They've perfected the art of debt trap diplomacy, taking advantage of struggling countries to bend them to their will. Informationally, you look no further than COVID-19. Rather than alerting the world about the coronavirus outbreak, the CCP focused on silencing their own doctors, scientists, and journalists who tried to warn us. Additionally, the CCP's cyber attacks on U.S. military personnel information, the F-35 submarine bases, are well known, and China has deployed Western technology to supply on and oppress the Uyghurs and have even conducted genocide against them. Militarily, China has been deploying its forces and building islands in the South China Sea in violation of international court judgments. Just a few weeks ago, the Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy opened its first overseas base in the Horn of Africa, and lately we've seen alarming trends in the Chinese state-backed entities looking to gobble up American companies critical to our national security. Economically, China continues to steal intellectual property from Western nations, especially the U.S. Huawei's theft of Motorola technology, which led to the company's demise, the loss of thousands of U.S. jobs, and billions from the U.S. GDP. It's a case study in their predatory behavior. The U.S. Trade Representative has estimated that China's IP theft has cost our GDP between $200 and $600 billion annually. And of course, China continues to practice currency manipulation and unfair trade behavior. The second priority must be reflected in the budget is supporting Israel, one of our greatest allies. From my experience fighting the war on terror, I know that the Middle East is fraught with instability, insecurity, and lots of uncertainty. While we have other solid allies in the Middle East, by far the nation that aligns with our values the most is Israel. It's a thriving democracy that respects human rights and shares our Western values. Unfortunately, Israel has once again come under threat. Just last month, Hamas militants reportedly fired over 4,000 rockets deep into Israeli territory. Given the importance of Israel to regional security, we have to ensure that the State Department's budget enhances our diplomatic and security partnership. And lastly, strengthening the Western Hemisphere. As ranking member of the Western Hemisphere, working side by side with Chairman Cirrus, it's our job to advocate for stronger relationships with Latin America and Caribbean countries. It's a region of significant opportunity that's too often overlooked. There are weak economies there. Areas of human rights violations, corruption, and violence have increased, and the dangerous surge of illegal migration on our southern border is due to push factors in those countries. Over the last few decades, many manufacturing jobs have left Latin America and gone to communist China. According to the Inter-American Development Bank, up to $80 billion in annual imports from China to the United States could be replaced by Latin American exports. And that's why I'm drafting nearshoring legislation to bring those jobs back, working with leaderships of the IDB and DFC. And Mr. Secretary, I'd like to let you know that Mr. Zuniga has been very cooperative, and we have plans for breakfast soon. In addition to advancing economic opportunities, we must stand up to oppressive socialist regimes in Cuba, Venezuela, and the increasingly authoritarian government in Nicaragua. Human rights are universal, and America must support freedom and democracy in the region. Finally, we must work with our allies to combat corruption, disrupt drug and human trafficking networks, and reduce illegal migration.